Hello, everybody. Welcome to my channel, Eclectic Reads. I am Alina. On this channel, I talk about a wide range of books. If you're a returning subscriber, welcome back. Today, I'm doing another video in a series that I started called Bookish Cousins, where I talk about at least two books on a similar topic or theme that are not written by the same author. Today, I want to talk about the ills of public relations and advertising. Now, I am under no illusion that PR is used exclusively for negative things. I know that PR has been used in beneficial ways. For instance, during the civil rights movement. I remember learning a few years ago that Rosa Parks didn't just happen to be on a bus. I learned that this was part of an entire strategy, a campaign to draw the nation's attention to racial discrimination and segregation. But today I want to talk about the dark side of that because I read two books recently that dealt with this topic. The first book I'm going to talk about is Empire of Pain by Patrick Radden Keefe. And the second book is Father of Spin by Larry Tai. Empire of Pain tells the story of the Sackler family and their notorious pharmaceutical company, Purdue Pharma. It starts by talking about Arthur, the oldest of the three Sackler brothers. The middle brother was Mortimer, and the youngest brother was Raymond. Raymond becomes very important for the history of Purdue Pharma because he was the one who really ran Purdue Pharma, and then it was his son Richard, and then Richard's son David, who ran the company. However, Arthur really set the foundation for what was to come. Arthur made his name as a psychiatrist in the early 20th century, and he did some very important work. At a time when psychiatric patients had to endure lobotomies and electric shock treatment, Arthur pushed for medical solutions to mental illness, suggesting that chemical imbalances could explain in part these illnesses. And so if patients took medications that he developed, that they wouldn't have to endure all of these other treatments. And so that's really, really good. But where we start to enter into some murky territory is when Arthur starts getting into advertising. It is this combination of advertising and medicine that leads to the tragedy of the opioid epidemic. Arthur, from the very beginning, was advertising for other pharmaceutical companies as well as for his own. And he really found a way to change public opinion about drugs. Purdue Pharma actually was like some small company that was selling laxatives. It wasn't doing very well when it was acquired by the Sacklers. But obviously, through OxyContin, it grew to be a multi-billion-dollar industry that caused untold harm on the American population. Throughout this book, Patrick Radden Keefe shows how the Sacklers concealed all of the information they had about the abuse of their drug, OxyContin. And not only did they conceal this information, but actually they profited immensely from it. Salespeople were rewarded for pushing this drug on doctors who were unscrupulous, who were willing to overprescribe oxy at the highest doses. Whenever anybody came forward saying that they were suffering addiction because of this drug, Raymond Sackler would claim that the only people who were addicted were people who already had a history of addiction, which wasn't true. The packaging said that the drug would last 12 hours, and so people would only have to take 2 a day, but many people ended up having to take way more because the drug's effects didn't last as long as the label claimed. And the Sacklers also used their money to buy the support of the FDA so that the FDA would look away and allow them to push the highest doses of this drug. This is a big book, but I flew through it. I was horrified all the ways in which this company protected itself. They had their own Tom Hagen that would take the fall and, would aggressively fight for the Sacklers. A lot of this book felt like I was watching The Godfather. The Sacklers, they're like a mob family. And it was really harrowing and horrifying to see how advertising has allowed for a company like this to be so successful and to ruin so many lives. Arthur was a huge art collector, and the Sackler family over the years donated art collections to the Met and the Louvre and the Smithsonian in DC. Their names were on these galleries, so they were very well respected, even while they were causing untold harm to millions of Americans. They were being celebrated by these art galleries. So this book tells the story of Nin Golden, who was and is an activist who used her voice and got a group together to convince these galleries to take the Sackler name off their buildings. And to date, not a single Sackler has been imprisoned and probably never will. Sure, they have to pay billions of dollars, but that's just a slap on the wrist for these wealthy people. I think that this book really explains why so many people have so many suspicions toward the pharmaceutical industry in the United States, which only impacts public health negatively. It explains why so many people won't go to the doctor. Of course, beyond the fact that medical care is very expensive, it doesn't help that there are these very unscrupulous pharmaceutical industries making billions off of the suffering of other people. I thought that this was a fantastic read, and it remains one of the best nonfiction books I've ever read. I highly recommend Empire of Pain. Immediately after finishing this book, I picked up a much older book. This book was written in the late 90s, called Father of Spin by Larry Tye. I had actually purchased this book before borrowing Empire of Pain because I have a background in rhetoric. I did my doctorate in French literature, particularly looking at early modern rhetoric, and so I've always been interested in rhetoric, and of course, in the modern world, rhetoric is channeled quite a bit in advertising and public relations. So I knew about Eddie Bernays, and I wanted to read a biography of him. Edward Bernays is the self-professed father of public relations, and self-professed is very important. Because while Eddie Bernays certainly had an impact on public relations in the United States, he definitely inflated his influence in many ways. And it is this inflation that is discussed in this biography, in addition to all the various campaigns he was involved in. And in one of the less interesting parts of this book, we go into his family life, how he was as a father and husband. And I could have done without that because he wasn't very good at either. And sure, it shows that he was very arrogant and self-centered, but I was much more interested in his campaigns and his self-fashioning as this PR guru. The connection between Eddie Bernays and Arthur Sackler is obviously in the way that they changed public opinion about something really dangerous through aggressive advertising. And one of the more famous campaigns that Eddie Bernays was involved in was the campaign to promote Lucky cigarettes to women. In the 1920s, it was considered taboo for women to smoke publicly. But this was also the time of the women's rights movement. The American Tobacco Company, which manufactured Lucky cigarettes, was not doing so well in sales, and they really wanted to grow. And Eddie Bernays, along with the owner of American Tobacco, came up with a scheme to promote these cigarettes to a demographic that hadn't really indulged in smoking until now: women. And what better way to promote smoking to women than by framing it as a form of female liberation? So I'm going to put on the screen some of the various posters advertising cigarettes to women. And Eddie Bernays also arranged these marches where women would publicly smoke, celebrating smoking as this form of female liberation, and ultimately changing how the public viewed women smoking. Now, as Larry Tye points out, even in the 1920s, tobacco companies knew about the harm that cigarettes caused. They were very aware, and this explains why some of their campaigns would talk about how a certain brand of cigarette caused less coughing than other brands, because they knew that at the very least it caused coughing. But they concealed this information and found other ways to promote their brand. what makes public relations go even further than advertising is that public relations is about shaping the worldview of a populace, about completely changing the way that a society views a certain product and really seeing their own identities as connected to that product. And that is what Eddie Bernays was able to do again and again. As I said, this book is 30 years old. And yes, at times it was a bit boring, especially when it talked about Eddie Bernays' family life. But I was really fascinated with the similarities between Bernays' campaign to promote cigarettes and other things, and the Sackler family's aggressive marketing of the highest doses of oxy to people in chronic pain, vulnerable people who are looking for a solution to their suffering, and all of the unscrupulous doctors who and salespeople who are very much at the heart of this epidemic. I think that the next class action lawsuit is going to be about e-cigarettes. I remember when e-cigarettes came out, they were marketed as a safer alternative to traditional cigarettes and the way that they have been marketed toward children. And of course, menthol cigarettes that were marketed aggressively to Black people in urban communities. Empire of Pain is a book that everybody should read. It also makes you more aware of the advertising you come across, especially medical advertising. If you're not American, you probably don't know that in the US, we receive so many ads about drugs, and it'll be like, talk to your doctor if this drug is right for you, after a long Santa Claus list of side effects, which can include death. And I always think to myself, why am I going to talk to my doctor? And I often think that these ads are more for the doctors who might be watching at home than for the patients. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've never gone to my doctor and said, I saw this ad about this drug. I think I'm going to try it myself. Anyway, let me know if you have read other books or seen other documentaries about other products that have caused harm and been aggressively marketed. And I will talk to you later. Bye now.